I have always loved the Fable series. As a young teen, I remember reading my older brother's Games TM magazine, namely the article about the original Fable. The concept of player choice being a driving force behind the narrative, and the world changing depending upon the player's actions, filled my mind with wonder. I instantly asked my mum, if she could buy me the new Xbox. Literally pleaded and begged her. Mama, please! A few months later, I finally received the console, along of course with the original KOTOR on Halo 2. I did have taste of games as a teen, thank you very much. Now don't get me wrong, I still really enjoyed the game, but overall felt it was quite shallow and lacked depth. Fast forward and Fable 2 was announced. At this time, Fable had become one of my favourite games, so naturally, I tried to find any information or news regarding its sequel. This meant, looking online for interviews or discussions or gameplay, you name it. And of course, I stumbled upon a number of different interviews from Fable 2's head designer, Peter Molyneux. I enjoyed Fable 2, but once again, it just fell flat, felt relatively lackluster. Fable 3 was then announced and yeah, I did buy it day one again, like a fool. Yeah, keeping it moving. The next generation was around the corner, and with it the next Fable.
Oh my god.
Would it be a massive, real open world action RPG which, due to the new power of these new consoles, would expand and be the Fable game the fans had always been waiting for? No, not at all. It was to be a cooperative action title where you have to choose 1 of 4 heroes to face off against a villain who can control enemies, traps and bosses in order to hinder the 4 players.
Pass!
Yeah. Now don't get me wrong, it may have been an excellent game. I say may because it was cancelled, but it is not what anybody wants or expects from a Fable title. Can you imagine Elder Scrolls 6 was a battle royale? Or the next Zelda was a MOBA? It just doesn't work. What were they thinking? I could not wait for Fable Legends to be released, solely so they could move on and start working on the next true Fable experience, but that never came. Lionhead Studios was then disbanded and there was no new news about the franchise whatsoever for a few years. We eventually started to hear rumours that a team at Microsoft had been developing a new open world RPG that was supposedly Fable. The possibility of a new Fable game made me think about everything I would love to see from a new title. So I thought I'd make a quick video, well I say quick, about what I want from a new Fable game. So let's start with the setting. Previous Fable titles have all mainly been set in Albion, with the third game also having some sections in Aurora. The latest leaks have said that the game is set on multiple planets and will also involve time travel. I for one don't really think this is necessary. When you look at the way that Rockstar has updated GTA 5's map from San Andreas to 5, it felt natural and new, but at the same time familiar. I feel like a similar approach could definitely benefit Albion and even Aurora. And although completely new map or maps could be done very well, I feel Albion and definitely Aurora were never really truly done justice. When you look at games like Breath of the Wild, GTA 5 and Dark Souls, they all had amazing maps. The maps in these titles almost work as their own characters. Albion, in comparison, has always felt more like multiple corridors and small open spaces weaved together to give the illusion of an open world. This of course was probably due to the available hardware at the time, but I would love to see Albion and Aurora become fully open world, fully realised, seamless maps. The cities and towns present could also benefit from being much larger and much more expansive. The Fable franchise has always had a number of systems that simply fell short. Take for example, the ability to buy and customize properties. So on a macro level, players should be able to create and design their own cities and towns, moving around buildings, creating new buildings, setting up districts and so on. This in turn could have an impact on the NPCs' lives in the game, causing them to do things such as set up resistance groups to revolt against the player or even join you, depending on how your choices impacted them. A more in-depth economy should also be present, which should be directly affected by the player's actions. On a micro level, the player should also be able to fully customize interiors. The previous Fable titles allowed this, but only specific areas inside certain buildings could be changed. Fable 3 also allowed you to change the aesthetic of your castle, but this was too black and white, with the only options being the good look or the bad one. Fable installments have always held the player's hands, whereas a game like Skyrim will introduce the player to its world, put them through a tutorial and then leave them to it. The Fable titles, especially the third, are constantly guiding the player, and due to this, the games can feel, for lack of a better word, claustrophobic. Fable's combat is another aspect that needs to be improved. It always felt basic but serviceable and was very janky. Lionhead have tried to go for a simplistic but deep combat system, but in my opinion have once again fallen short. I mean, the combat is alright I guess, but it never reaches any real level of depth. The latest titles gave the player unlimited magic and ammunition, which conceptually may have made sense, but in practice results in the player spamming spells or bullets/arrows/bolts. If infinite magic and ammo are kept in the sequel or the new title, whichever it may be, I think there should be a limitation put in place. As an example, if the player is continually spamming fireballs, they may catch a light or sustain damage as their hands will begin to burn, and a stamina bar is definitely needed for melee combat. The Fable franchise, like many other RPGs, has always had 3 combat specialities. These are Strength, which is everything melee. This is how hard a character can hit and governs the player's physical attributes. Skill, which is everything ranged and stealthy. This is how adept the player character is with bows, crossbows or guns, depending on the game, as well as any other dexterity based attributes. And Will, which is everything magic based. This is solely about magic. A character with high will be able to cast spells faster and stronger and cast better spells. Lionhead opted to link each of these specialities to a single button, which I feel has always limited the scope of the combat. Yes, the single button combat does work, but it is definitely too simplistic. In a new installment, I would love to see slower and more methodical combat like in Dark Souls. The stats should matter more in that if a player has higher strength, they should be able to wield heavier weapons better. And yes, they did touch on this in some of their titles, where weapons you could use depended on your stats, but after the initial requirements to wield said weapon were met, the stats no longer had any real effect on how the weapon was wielded, other than perhaps the speed in which the weapon itself was swung. They should also make the character's alignment impact how they fight. If the player chooses to be a mass murderer, their strikes should be more savage and brutal, whereas if they are good, perhaps their strikes could be more precise and deliberate. I have also always wondered why you were never able to combine combat specialities. Being able to infuse your weapons or arrows with elemental magic on the fly, or even using your magical abilities to control weapons in the environment would be amazing. Stealth was also a missed opportunity, as the skill build allowed you to wield ranged weapons more effectively, and by effectively I simply mean doing more damage, but other than that, the games don't really have stealth systems. No matter how you opted to play the games, the player always ended up being proficient in all 3 combat specialities. The next game should limit this, or at least make it so it takes a very long time to max out all 3. We could definitely do with more diverse and varied builds. Fable's story's always been rubbish. This is my opinion, but it always feels like it's tried to have a grand story filled with high stakes that has always fell flat on its face. I have always felt that Fable's narrative has actually been a hindrance. At its core, the games are about choice and consequence. But by having a set narrative with very few options and choices, the narrative design goes against the game's core design philosophy of choice. Also, the main character is always a hero, which is the equivalent in the Fable universe as being born with superpowers or will. But the title hero stifles the player and makes it seem as though no matter how evil you are in the games, the narrative always funnels you into being a hero. The next game could greatly benefit if the story was created by the player's actions. For example, let's say the player chooses to have a child and they then abandon said partner and child and/or treat them badly. They then go on to be a renowned hero or villain, and the child grows up, of course, disliking them. They could then become the antithesis of what their parent is, studying them in order to one day defeat them. This is one example of a way that storylines can be created by the player's actions, which would result in a more tailored and personal experience for each player. Developers are quick to claim that the NPCs in their titles live real lives in real worlds, but I personally have yet to see a game where the NPCs feel alive. The next Fable game should have real feeling NPCs with their own storylines that are concurrently occurring. These should progress regardless of the player's presence and interaction, but allow the player to intervene in or join at any point in order to affect the outcome, similar to the robots' lives in the Westworld television series. Each player would have vastly different experiences based on where they went and what they did. Now, of course, I know this is a lot easier said than done. I know this would take substantial development time and effort, and how difficult this would be to even achieve, but a man can dream, right? Other NPCs in the world should also be able to be heroes or villains. They should be able to become your allies or your enemies depending on your actions and your alignment. But we will have to wait and see how the narrative is, of course, handled. The character themselves. So this is the most interesting and unique aspect of any Fable game. The character morphing in Fable is one of the main systems that I and many fans play Fable titles for. Like climbing enemies in Shadow of the Colossus, it is a mechanic or gameplay design choice that I wish was a lot more common in modern video games. I always felt like the morphing system could be greatly expanded upon, but Lionhead definitely struck gold by including this into the Fable franchise, and this has always been one of the more exclusive features of Fable. Now, historically, it was a little too black and white, and often due to this could dictate the actions and choices that the player chose to actually make. Players, for the most part, would play the games with the intention of creating a good or evil character, but I feel that this is due to the limits of the system. If the system were more complex and more choices had real consequences, it could make the actions the player chose to do matter more and make them think twice before acting, instead of simply going for maximum good or maximum evil. The way it affected the character's looks was also impressive, but once again was also too black and white. Fable 2 added corruption and purity, which worked as a way to further modify your character's physical appearance based on their morality, and I think the next installment should add a number of different modifiers that are constantly in play to further change how characters look. All of the modifiers themselves should also be hidden, so players are not simply trying to reach the end of a bar, and should be more of a spectrum than a bar. The character's chosen combat speciality should also work in tandem with the morality, meaning an evil character with high will should have different devil horns than a character with high strength. The character with high will should have more ethereal looking horns, whereas the character with high strength should have bigger, more imposing ones. The character should be able to also influence NPCs in the world, making them do things such as starting cults in worship of you, copy your hairstyles or even your attire. Fable 1 and 2 had different experience pools which rewarded the player with different types of experience based on whether they used strength, skill or will. Fable 3 removed this idea, but I think Lionhead were on the right track with Fable 1 and 2. The player's character should naturally change depending on the way they fight, meaning if they go into battle with a warhammer, they should become more muscular, or when using a bow or sneaking, they should become lither. Lither? Hell yeah. Yeah, I can go on forever. but I want to hear your thoughts, your opinions, and what you think the next Fable installment should be like. So please, leave a comment down below and let's get talking. I have been Nye, and this has been Zoned. For more news, discussions and opinions, go to Zoned.Live. Peace! Oh, it's pronounced lither. Shame.